Hi, I'm Alan Nelson, owner and operator of Abbey Repair. I've been fixing sewing machine serges and embroidery machines for 20 years and teaching people how to use them. Today what I'd like to do is to take just a little bit of time and show you what happens every single stitch on a sewing machine. The difference between the upper thread and the lower thread and how the two interact with the machine in the middle to make stitches that hold fabric together the way you want the fabric to be held together. This is a Bernina 830. I think it's a wonderful machine. It's my favorite machine that Bernina came up with. You have a bobbin and a bobbin case that snap onto a hook. Down underneath the needle plate, this is what a Bernina hook looks like on this machine. It has a little pin that the bobbin case snaps onto. Every single stitch, this hook catches the upper thread, pulls it around the bobbin case, and then backs up again. And here it catches the thread, here it lets go of the thread. The thread comes off of the end of that hook, and it happens very, very fast. I want to always start every stitch in what I call the home position. The thread take-up lever is at the top of its swing, and the needle bar is on its way down, not very far, just a little ways. And when that needle bar comes down a little bit, that's when the thread take-up lever goes to the top of its stroke. On a lot of computer machines, particularly the newer ones, they like you to stop at the home position so much, they force that computer to drive the machine to this position every time you take your foot off the foot control. They also have a little button on it that will force the machine to stop with the needle down in the fabric as the other end of that spectrum. So the needle's all the way to the top and down a little, or it's all the way down to the bottom. When I put this hook in the machine, it nests together against this crescent moon shaped piece and this half moon shape. It's kind of like the yin and the yang. They fit together just like that, and then a retainer snaps to hold it in place. I'm going to pull the bobbin out of this for this little part of the demonstration. I'm going to snap the bobbin case back on again, and I'm going to have that thread go all the way down to the bottom. Now the hook's going to catch it. And down under here, you can see this green thread coming across here. That's the upper thread. It has to be the upper thread because here's the bobbin. I mean, it's underneath the needle plate, and a lot of people think that the only thread that goes underneath the fabric is the bobbin thread. Well, that's not the case at all. At this point, there's probably 5 inches of upper thread underneath the needle plate. And it's the job of your upper tension, and this is your upper tension on this machine, to pull all of that thread tight up into the fabric. And here's your thread take-up lever. This is what's going to do that. When the machine continues on in its cycle, the thread take-up lever pulls all of that thread up tight into the fabric. The needle goes down into the needle plate. The hook comes behind the needle when the needle is on the way up, and it catches that upper thread, and it's going to pull it around the bobbin case. And this is where the needle is up and out of the fabric, but your upper thread is still locked underneath the needle plate on the hook. If you tried to move the fabric now, even though the needle is out of it, the fabric couldn't move because that upper thread is still trapped underneath the needle plate. You go through the cycle a little bit more, the hook lets go of the upper thread pulls back up. We know that's upper thread that we're seeing down there because here's the bobbin. I don't even have it in. If it were bobbin thread that we were seeing, we'd need a bobbin in there. But every single stitch, there's about 4.5 or 5 inches of upper thread underneath the needle plate, and it's the job of the thread take-up lever to pull that thread tight into the fabric. Now I want this thread to come up through. So again, the needle goes all the way down, comes up, and when that needle reaches the top of its swing, the hook lets go of that upper thread, so it grabs that lower thread, pulls it through the needle hole with it. Now I want to make sure that the take-up lever is at the top of its stroke. If you start before the thread take-up lever is at the top of its stroke, what it's going to want to do is pull the thread right out of your needle when you start sewing. With the thread take-up lever at the top of its stroke, it can't do that. The very first thing that it does is the needle's on the way down, the thread take-up lever also goes down, and it gives it the slack that it needs so that all of this is just loose thread, so that the thread can go underneath, around the bobbin and the bobbin case, do its little twist with it, and come back on top again. The way it looks like in a piece of fabric is the needle goes down, the upper thread twists with the lower thread, the thread take-up lever pulls both of them up into the fabric, and depending on how high you have your upper tension and your lower tension set, depends on how high in the fabric that knot rides. Typically, we want that knot to be right in the middle of the fabric, or that twist. They call it a knot, but it's really just a twist. We want that to be in the middle of the fabric. If you were using two different threads on a thin fabric like this, you would see a little bit of the lower thread on the top and a little bit of the top thread on the bottom, because where that twist happens, your upper thread comes down and you would see this part of it on the bottom, and your lower thread comes up, you would see that part of it on the top of the fabric. If you're doing something heavier, that knot's going to be hiding inside, you won't see it at all. I want to do 2 stitches by hand, because the machine can do 1 stitch and things not be set right. But if you do that 2nd stitch and 3rd stitch and everything still feels really free, the machine's ready to sew. And that's exactly what a stitch is with a Bernina 830. I'm going to show you on a Singer 99K. And with a Singer 99K, it does pretty much the same thing. The needle goes down into the fabric, the thread take-up lever follows it down, the needle comes up, the thread take-up lever comes all the way to the top of its stroke, and now just as this thread take-up lever reaches the top of its stroke, this is a little check spring. And that check spring acts as a shock absorber for the thread. This has a check spring too that Bernina does, but it's hidden so you can't see it. With this one, it sits out in the open and you can see it very easily. And that check spring softens the blow. And on this machine too, it's really easy to see. You just get a little bit of thread, and that's what this felt pad's for, and why you want to have a really nice surface for that felt pad to touch against. So it acts as a little bit of a spool brake, so that spool just does little incremental turns every single stitch. So the needle goes down into the fabric, comes up a little ways, the hook comes behind that needle, and as the thread take-up lever's coming down, the hook is pulling that lower thread all the way around the bobbin and bobbin case. And then when the thread clears the bobbin case, the thread take-up lever pulls it tight into the fabric. Every single stitch. with every sewing machine out there. And that is exactly what happens every stitch, and what I call the anatomy of a stitch. If you have any questions or comments on this or any of our other videos, please feel free to contact us through the link below. Thank you very much.
Today I'd like to walk you through a few different types of machines to show you how sewing machines, even though they're all a little different, they all pretty much do the same thing.